Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Our program is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please find your seats and we'll start momentarily. We still have a few latecomers, so and if they don't show up, help yourself to the leftovers. As we say in Tagalog Filipino, make it your baon, which says your lunch plate somewhere, but I'm just kidding. Are we ready? All right, for all of us here, ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the presentation of the national colors, the singing of the national anthem, and we will all recite the Pledge of Allegiance after.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glow, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Please face the flag and help me recite our Pledge of Allegiance with your hands over your heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic for which it stands, one under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Right shoulder on. Post turn, march.
Let's give a round of applause for our color guard, joint color guard, and our singer. Okay, and please be seated. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tony Taguba, the chairman of the Pan-Pacific American Leaders and Mentors, or PPALM. Can everybody see me? I told them to turn up the lights so I can be visible. I'm co-host with Ms. Madeline Melka, President and CEO of the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. And we welcome you to the 2022 Military Leadership Appreciation Luncheon. And we all know that this is quite a refreshing moment that we're attending this event in person. However, we still need to safeguard from COVID. This is our 8th annual event, and we look forward to having another great program. Now, our event is nested under the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and coincidentally, it coincided with the Armed Forces Day that we celebrated on May 21st, and now we're going to still celebrate on the eve of Memorial Day, which is on May 30th. This year's theme of Courage to Lead is testament to hundreds and thousands of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders who willingly serve our country since the mid-1800s. Their service to the nation was enduring as then as it is today. Over 200 years of racial violence, discrimination, repression, and intolerance they experienced serving our country that ultimately challenged them to display their patriotic duty, to prove their loyalty and faith to our country, and to fulfill the promise of being called citizens of the United States. Some more on that later in the program, but let me now turn the podium to our co-host, Ms. Madeline Melky, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Asia Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. Please welcome Madeline.
Thank you, Tony. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Madeline Milka, President and CEO of APAICS, the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. I'm delighted to welcome you today to this year's Military Leadership Appreciation event. I think I see Floyd Morey somewhere, right? Yeah? The ever-youthful Floyd Morey. So he is my predecessor and helped to start this appreciation event along with General Taguba. Public service is not only about serving an elected office. It extends to those who serve in our military branches, and I'm honored to be the daughter of a Green Beret who rests in peace at Arlington National Cemetery. For those who don't know about APAICS, we were founded in 1994 by the former Secretary Norman Y. Mineta, who we recently lost. And alongside the Congressional Asia Pacific American Caucus, CAPAC, he co-founded both of our organizations. The caucus is composed of congressional members who are of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander ancestry. APAICS's mission is to build the political pipeline at all levels of government, from community advocate to elected office. We provide opportunities for AA and NHPIs to better understand the legislative process through our paid internship and paid fellowship programs. Since APAICS's founding, we've placed hundreds of interns and fellows throughout the legislative branch, as well as trained over thousands of individuals through our leadership academies who have now become elected officials. For today's event, we're honored to have United States Senator Tammy Duckworth joining us. It's an honor for us to co-host this event, and I welcome all of you.
Thank you, Madeline. Now, before I introduce our distinguished guests, I would like to briefly recount what this Military Leadership Appreciation event is about. Our nation's historical archives recorded Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders to have served with Americans to fight against the British during the War of 1812. The recent research from the National Park Service accounted for some 339 Asians and Pacific Islanders who served during the Civil War, 237 of them in the Navy and 102 in the Army, who fought with the Union Army and also with the Confederacy. Now, these sailors and soldiers came from 27 different Asian countries and Pacific Islands. Interestingly enough, that they fought for this country, yet they were still considered as non-citizens of our nation. World War II was a tipping point where thousands upon thousands of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders served in Europe and the Pacific willingly or were pressed into action to defend the United States. The military then was still segregated. There were the Japanese Americans, the Nisei soldiers, the Chinese Americans, and Filipino Americans. America needed them to fight against America's enemies, foreign and domestic. But the cost of their service was interminable, and sacrifice were also that did not stop. They were still dealt with racial intolerance, violence, and social injustice when they returned home after the war. Their service in the greatest generation inspired and produced prominent and influential leaders in Congress and military. And some of them were Norman Y. Mineta, an Army soldier, former mayor of San Jose, a congressman from California, and served as Secretary of Transportation and Commerce, respectively, and who recently passed away on May 3rd, 2022. Then we have Daniel Inouye, an Army soldier, a Medal of Honor recipient, a senator from Hawaii. The U.S. Navy named a ship after him, the USS Daniel K. Inouye, DDG-118, an Arleigh Burke Aegis-guided missile destroyer. Then we have General Eric Shinzeki, United States Army retired, became the 34th Chief of Staff of the Army, and later as the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. And you all know in the Navy, Admiral Harry Harris, United States Navy retired, former commander of Indo-Pacific Command, and later as U.S. Ambassador to Korea. General Michael Nakasone, U.S. Army, commander of U.S. Cyber Command, and director of the National Security Agency. Not to be outdone, we have Vice Admiral Raquel Bono, U.S. Navy retired, a medical doctor, and former director of the Defense Health Agency. Another is Major General Suzanne Vares-Lum, U.S. Army retired, Special Assistant to the Commander Indo-Pacific Command, and now President of East-West Center in Hawaii. She's not here yet, but I don't see her, but Senator Tammy Duckworth, a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel, a wounded warrior and the first female double amputee she suffered in combat, a former congressman, and now serving currently as a senator from Illinois. There are hundreds more like them that broke the proverbial bamboo ceiling imposed upon them by racial prejudice and discrimination. Asian Americans and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders serving in the uniform of the United States Armed Forces then and now, have always followed the noble and patriotic tradition of duty to country. We are delighted this afternoon to acknowledge several distinguished guests with us today, to include college students, cadets, and midshipmen. Now, Army is being outflanked, you might say, by our middies from the Naval Academy. But you have to make that up next year. So we are proud to have one of our very distinguished World War II veterans, Senior Chief Petty Officer Ray Karbakar, United States Navy retired, a World War II veteran and recipient of the Congressional Gold Medal. He is one of the very few living veterans we have in our country today. Sadly, a few of our World War II veterans, First Lieutenant Elsie Cito, a U.S. Army nurse, Private Robert Lee, an Army engineer, and Petty Officer Third Class Austin Waugh, a Navy sailor and a minesweeper on the USS Breeze, were not able to attend today due to their frail health. We also mourn the loss of Lieutenant Celestino Almeida, U.S. Army, 104 years old, who passed away in March of 2022. Now, even in death, he still needed proof of service as a veteran of World War II to be buried at the Quantico National Cemetery in Virginia. We'll lay him to rest on April 7th, 2022. We have Senator Tammy Duckworth, as I had mentioned before. She will speak with us, for us, and to us in a few minutes. And not to be left behind, Honorable Erica Murtsugu. Is she here yet? On her way. Deputy Assistant to the President and Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Senior Liaison. We have Lieutenant General David Huntoon, United States Army retired, former Director of the Army Staff and former Superintendent of the United States Military Academy at West Point. Rear Admiral Patrick Piercy. You will probably recognize him on table 3. He's got a beard and he's got a ponytail. Maybe he retired. I thought I was going to tease him. One of the few Asian American Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders who commanded Carrier Strike Group 9 in the Pacific and formerly the Chief of Staff of European Command. Brigadier General James Conless, U.S. Air Force, seated with me on table 1. He is the commander of Defense Logistics Agency Energy. He's the gas man. He's the fuel guy. So if you have any problems with the prices of gas, get him on. Brigadier General John Cho, U.S. Army retired, a medical doctor. God, we're blessed that we have a doctor in the house. He is CEO and Executive Director of AMSIS. Mr. Sam Mock, where are you, Sam? There he is at my table, who served as an Army officer and former Chief Financial Officer at the Departments of Labor and Treasury, respectively. Colonel Peter Tan, U.S. Army retired. He is now currently serving as a civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army. Colonel Michael Siegel, seated over there at what table? U.S. Army and soon to command the U.S. Army Quartermaster Center and School at Fort Lee, Virginia. Ms. Susan N. Davis, Chairman of the Board of APAICS, and Mr. Peter Nguyen, President of Federal Asia Pacific American Council. So I'll cut it off there because we will acknowledge others later. But last but not least, I would like to present the newest young leaders of the Army and the U.S. Navy. Please stand, you too, Lieutenant Rohrer, and be recognized. All of you. Midshipmen, stand up. Don't be shy. We will not bite you. A lot of people, you may feel intimidated. Now, I've asked some of them, seated with leaders here, past and present, to query the prominent leaders seated in their table to ask 2 questions. The first is how the leaders here that are proudly seated with them, how were they able to be successful in their profession? That's the first question. And the second question is they're supposed to ask you, what are you doing to help grow leaders in the future? You have to impress them because they are the future of America. Now, each year we feature a story of Asian American and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander veterans who serve under the United States Armed Forces. This year we feature a cohort of soldiers of World War II, men and women who were recipients of the coveted Congressional Gold Medal, yet they were not fully recognized nor compensated due to a passage of a little-known law called the Rescission Act of 1946. This legislation passed by the 79th Congress in 1946 denied over 200,000 soldiers of their promised benefits and revoked their path to U.S. citizenship, the betrayal of a promise made by the President Franklin Roosevelt. The Rescission Act is still active today, 76 years later. Someday soon, and we hope soon, it will be repealed. So let's show the video.
Duty to Country tells the history of Filipinos' sacrifice and patriotism during World War II and their decades-long quest for recognition and justice after the war.
I think that oftentimes you get written out of history when you're not the one doing the writing.
World War II happened in many other places, and my grandma was one of those people who experienced that, and why have I never heard anything about the Philippines during the war?
No one talks about the Filipinos who were there, much less the fact that we took away their service afterwards. It's sort of a second-class kind of narrative about World War II.
If they rob you of your honor and betray you on the promise that was made to you, they don't pay you, and then they discount you. That's hard. You know, it's tantamount to being non-existent.
The Duty to Country Education Project is dedicated to sharing the untold story of two nations, the United States and the Philippines, fighting under one flag. This ongoing project includes hours of oral history testimonies, a dynamic online exhibition, and profiles of key historical figures. Under One Flag begins with the colonial period, setting the stage and providing critical context. It recounts the stories of World War II in depth, from generals and privates to guerrillas and civilians, along with telling the larger story of the war in the Philippines through words, photographs, and documentary footage. It brings to life oral history testimonies through dynamic motion comics. The post-World War II era reveals the U.S. government rescinding its commitment to those who fought in the Philippines under our flag. The story continues through the contemporary period. For decades, Filipino Americans, veterans, and others have fought tirelessly all the way to the Supreme Court and into the halls of Congress for recognition, veterans' benefits, and rights of citizenship that had been denied to them. The Duty to Country Education Project features several hours of oral histories, first-hand accounts of living veterans, historians, and community advocates.
Why were Filipinos singled out? Among the 66 nations that were part of the Allied forces, Filipinos were singled out to be deprived of their rightful benefits. Why?
I thought it would be easy to get their benefit, but I found out as a USAPI veteran, you are a second-rate citizen.
Duty to Country aims to recognize these men and women for their service and to prompt all Americans to recognize these events as part of our shared history. And it seeks to empower a new generation of young people to reflect on what we owe our country and how we can ensure America fulfills its promises in the future.
I think most people, by and large, assume that we live in a country where a government does right by our people. Yet, when we uncover the story, it's the story that we need to remember so that we can remain vigilant.
That story is not going to be told unless we do this education project. And we committed ourselves to making sure that that story also becomes enshrined in American history, much like the Navajo Code Talkers, much like the Japanese American Nisei soldiers, much like the African Americans who fought during the Civil War, because this story is part of American history.
as we say on the Army Creed, never leave a fallen comrade behind. And we sort of introduced that into the video. All right, we are still waiting for Senator Duckworth. They're busy in the Senate. So what we'll do, we'll have to adjust the schedule a little bit. I'll talk more for the next 30 minutes. I'm just kidding. But we're going to serve lunch. How's that? Everybody's hungry today. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? Continue to eat. One of our distinguished guest speakers is here, Senator Tammy Duckworth. So, well, she's on a time hack, you might say. So we'll bring her out in another couple of minutes. So, and then she'll be able to speak. Then she has to scoot out. So that's the nature of members of Congress today, in and out. So go ahead, continue to eat. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to introduce Senator Duckworth, and Madeline's going to do the honors.
It's my distinct pleasure to introduce U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth. She is an Iraq War veteran, Purple Heart recipient, and former Assistant Secretary of the United States Department of Veterans Affairs, who was among the first handful of Army women to fly combat missions during Operation Iraqi Freedom. She served in the Reserve Forces for 23 years before retiring at the rank of Lieutenant Colonel in 2014. She was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2016 after representing Illinois' 8th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives for 2 terms. If you don't already know her story, in 2004, she was deployed to Iraq as a Black Hawk helicopter pilot for the Illinois Army National Guard. On November 12th of 2004, her helicopter was hit by an RPG, and she lost her legs and partial use of her right arm. She spent the next year recovering at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, where she quickly became an advocate for her fellow soldiers. Please welcome U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth.
I'm going to go right here. All right, thank you. Well, hello, everybody. It's good to see everyone here. I'm sorry I'm running late. We just as I was about to come over, they did a 3-vote series in the Senate. Nobody asked my opinion as to when we should do it. So it's great to be here. Thank you, Madeline, for introducing me, and always for the incomparable Major General Taguba. Good to see you, sir. I still call him sir. Well, I'm so thrilled to be able to speak with you all today. And as we mark both Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Heritage Month and Military Appreciation Month, it's a real honor to be able to celebrate with this particular group of folks in the room today because of the very unique perspective that you bring to our armed forces. Despite what some folks say, and I'm in the middle of building the defense budget right now, and since the Democrats took charge, I am now chairwoman of the Air-Land Subcommittee. Macy Hirono is a chairwoman of this Naval Power Subcommittee. So between the two of us, that's only 2 Asians in the Senate, we cover air, land, and sea. And we control the budget for all 3. So we're, yes, girl power, Asian girl power. But even as we're building the budget, the strength of our nation and the strength of our military isn't in the size of the defense budget. It's not really about how many helicopters and tanks and guns and ships we own. The true strength of our nation, the true strength of our military, as the Russians are finding out, is the quality of the people who serve. The willingness, the diversity of experiences, the leadership skills. That's the true strength of our military, and we've known, we talk about this, right? We give it lip service every year about diversity is important and all of this, but it truly is. And just by having AAPIs, AA and HPIers in the military, just the presence in uniform makes a difference. I remember way back in 1996 when I did a NATO training exercise called Bright Star. It was in Egypt, and I was out there in my Hueys. This is how far back it was that it was in Hueys. It's always kind of a good ego check when you go to a museum and the aircraft you flew is actually in the museum. You're like, oh God, I'm not that old, but I am. But it was in Huey's, and we were out in the desert, and the French were there, and the British were there, and there we were, the reserve forces for representing the Army. And I come from Chicago, and so the guys in my unit have names like Murphy or Katowski. So it's all Irish or Polish. And in the middle of the desert, we were doing, a joint thing, and somebody went up to one of the tall redheads or the tall blonde guys in my unit and said, well, this is what we want to do, and can you, come to the meeting? We're going to have the brief. And then he's like, yeah, but you got to go talk to her. And I remember the Egyptian military officer said, who? And they're like, her. She's the platoon leader. She's the one you need to talk to. I'm just a crew chief, man. And they're like, the little Chinese girl is in charge? And they're like, yep, the little Chinese girl is in charge. But that's the nature of our military. And being in Iraq, I remember when we first, I was OIF 2, so very early on, and we were working with third country nationals, and we were working with local Iraqis, and they would observe me giving orders to big, tall, red-headed and blonde-headed guys, and they would listen to me, and they would see just the diversity of people within our unit and who was in charge and who was not. Just by being us, we make our nation stronger. We send the message of what America truly is and what we represent. That is the story of this country at its best. Our military, I fell in love with the Army in a way that nobody ever fell in love with the Army before when I went off to basic training. I thought I was just going to learn about what the difference between a platoon and a brigade is. I was going to take some ROTC classes and then go take the exam for the Foreign Service. But I fell in love with the Army in a way that no one ever fell in love with the Army before. I was miserable at Fort Knox, don't get me wrong. I locked myself in the latrines and cried many times. But what I loved about it was that it was a pure meritocracy. It only mattered if I was willing to carry my load and share in the load. It only mattered that I was willing to take my turn as Rotello and help carry the extra load or hump the extra ammo. It only mattered that I was willing to shoot straight and I could shoot straight. And that's what's the real strength of our military is, because our military has always been at the forefront of social justice and social change in this country. Whether it's Jackie Robinson winning his court-martial, whether it was American pilots asking for the Red Tails to escort them, the bomber pilots, because they knew that the Red Tails never lost a bomber in World War II, and it turned out that that were the Tuskegee Airmen who flew the Red Tail aircraft. The United States military has always been in the forefront of social change in this country. Because at the end of the day, it's a meritocracy. It's about, can you shoot straight? Are you going to lose a bomber or you're not going to lose a bomber? And who is going to get the mission done? And so it is really important to me to support and celebrate AA and HPIers who serve in our military, because you are part of that grand tradition. It goes back to the Civil War, when the first Chinese Americans won citizenship through service in the Civil War to help free the slaves. We are the only group of people in this nation that has had a right taken away from us, in that the Chinese Exclusion Act took away the citizenship of those veterans who earned them serving in the Civil War to help free other people of color. It is important. It is a grand tradition. It is an on-road tradition. It is one that is heavy in the weight that we carry when we choose to serve in uniform as AA and HPIers, whether it is the great Norm Mineta, whom we just lost, incomparable, who I don't know if many of you know the story, but some of you might not. I think it's worth telling because Steny Hoyer told me this story, and I already knew it. Norm Mineta, when his family was informed that they were going to the internment camps during World War II, his father had, I think, something like 24 hours notice, and got the family together, tried to grab whatever they could, and Norm came home from school, and his father said to Norm, you get to pack a bag. Tomorrow we're leaving. We don't know where we're going, but we're leaving. So Norm the next day showed up after he packed his bags in his Boy Scout uniform with the American flag on his shoulder and his baseball mitt. And that's what he wore into the internment camp. And this is a man who became one of the greatest, if not the greatest Secretary of Transportation this country has ever had, and one of the greatest cabinet secretaries, serving under 2 different administrations, who then went on during the days after 9/11 to urge President Bush to make sure that we did not react in a way that was racist, that we kept the eye on what the mission was, which was to go after the terrorists who would dare attack us. And so Asian Americans, even as we have been spat on, shoved, stabbed, put into camps, we've not stepped down. We continue to step up to serve. Many of you in uniform today probably have a family member who served, who spent time in that internment camp. And yet here you are wearing the great colors of our nation. To every American, we must say together, clearly and unambiguously, that targeting the AA and HPI community is wrong, and we will not stand for it. That we belong. We are not an other. We are part of the fabric of this nation. And I'm here to tell you that our nation owe you a debt of gratitude for carrying on that mantle. I'm not going to call it a burden. That mantle of service that AA and HPIers before you have served. I graduated from McKinley High School. Anybody else? No one else. Which was Daniel Inui's. Also, he was an alma mater from that school as well. But the fact that he received the Silver Star, which then of course was upgraded decades later. But at the time he had the Silver Star, lost his arm in combat, and yet couldn't get a haircut when he came home. We've changed this country for the better, and we're going to continue to change this country for the better. So I thank you for your service. I thank you for what you're doing, and I know you're changing things every single day. And by being who you are, when we interact with other nations, that is the forefront of how we carry America's values and what we stand for. Because despite the hate crimes that have been happening, and we're going to fight those, despite the language and the people who try to divide us as a nation, you being in uniform shows the rest of the world truly what service and honor and what AAPIs are to this country, which is indispensable. We are indispensable to the well-being of this nation. And I thank you for serving. Thank you. I have to run back because I'm in the middle of a vote series, but I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth. Inspirational, admirable. Some of us here, especially if you're from McKinley, I'm from Leilehua High School. Both public schools. We did not go to Punahou or anything of that nature. But
I got in trouble by saying they asked, when President Obama was running for, and they're like, oh, you went to Hawaii school in Hawaii just like him. Did you know him? I'm like, oh, I'm not one of those private school kids. I got in so much trouble.
Not a private school kid. But clearly, we could all recall some of that stuff that had happened to us in the past, and I can relate to some of the things that's happened to you and every place else. And having called the little Chinese general that when somebody saw me, and they asked me if I could speak English, I said, okay, it's my second language, but I started cussing at him. But that's not a problem. Anyways, but thank you very much for making the time. Ladies and gentlemen, please, another round of applause.
Thank you, everybody. Take care. Thank you. Bye, everyone. Take care.
I think we have time to get into our dessert, and then we'll give you another cue. Thank you. Okay, folks, time to get on with the program. If you need to go to the bathroom and have a break, you have about a minute and a half, or stay in place. I'm just kidding. Okay, are we ready? Everybody just get quiet. All right, our next speaker is literally our distinguished guest speaker, along with Tammy Duckworth. But I have the distinct honor of introducing her. The Honorable Erika Morisugu is the Deputy Assistant to the President of the United States and the Senior Liaison for Asian American, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islander communities on racial justice and equity matters. This is the first time that President Biden has created this office. She's no stranger to the military, as she is from a military family. Her dad is a Rear Admiral, and have loved ones who have served in the war, World War II. She's a consummate public servant, having served as Assistant Secretary for Congressional and Intergovernmental Relations at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and as the Senate Deputy Legislative Director at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. She also served as a senior representative of Senator Tammy Duckworth, yes, she did serve with her, and the late Senator Daniel Akaka of Hawaii, and at the Senate Democratic Policy Committee under the late Senator Harry Reid of Nevada. She's also involved with the National Partnership for Women and Families and the Anti-Defamation League, and the past member of the Pan-Pacific American Leaders and Mentors. I just want to let you know, all you PPALMs, that she know all about us. So, and taking notes from those who are here today. She's also very busy raising a family, but maintaining a great sense of humor. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm welcome for the Honorable Erika Morisugu.
Thank you, General. Aloha, y'all. Lab school girl. Just for the record, Senator's not here to hear me have my junior beau's pride. I'd like to start by thanking Madeline, our President and CEO of APAICS, and of course, Major General Tony Taguba, U.S. Army retired, and the chairman of PPALM, which I am a proud alumni of. Our other distinguished guests, Senator Tammy Duckworth, Delegate Chris Valderrama, Susan M. Davies, Peter Nguyen, and esteemed military members and veterans in the audience, including Senior Chief Petty Officer Ray Kabakara, who, as the General noted, is a World War II veteran, recipient of the Congressional Gold Medal. I hope everyone is having a great Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month and Military Appreciation Month. It's truly humbling to stand before you today. You see, I met General Taguba probably a couple of decades ago when I was working for Senator Danny Akaka. I think you were emailing me from your AOL account because I had the cool, like, WordPerfect version and you wanted me to reformat a flyer or something. So that's my origin story, and it's probably similar to all of yours. It always starts with the one little thing, because you flash forward, and the next thing I knew, I was suddenly on as all-volunteer, voluntold PPALM Board of Directors, overseeing meeting records and event logistics as the staff secretary. And over the years, I continued to help out here and there, or rather, I was voluntold to assist with various PPALM tasks. But here, I want to just kind of brag a little bit on the General. He's not just an extraordinary leader, which we all know, and a consummate tasker. I'm Exhibit A, but his vision is spot on. And it's always aspirational, to be sure, but always mission-driven and heart-driven and devastatingly effective. He says, let's get a Congressional Gold Medal for Filipino-American vets. Yes, sir. He says, let's use the example of that success to get Congressional Gold Medals for the Chinese Americans who served in World War II. Yes, General. He says, let's get the next naval battleship commissioned and named after Filipino-American and recipient of the Medal of Honor in April 1915. Okay, General. So when he asked me to be his keynote speaker for this year's luncheon, I knew I had to say yes, because he's a general. He's our general. And of course, pending clearance from White House Ethics, which I got. Thank you, Renee. It's wonderful to be here with you today as Deputy Assistant to the President and Senior Liaison to the Asian American and Native Hawaiian and Pacific staff, acting as the voice in the West Wing lifting up the perspectives and the hopes and the needs of the AAN and HPI communities in all of our administration's policies and politics and community and stakeholder outreach and engagement. I'm charged with making sure that the richness and diversity of our communities are no longer invisible, and that the impacts of our administration policies are inclusive of and informed by and communicated to our communities. I do this work with the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders, which is led by our dear friends Crystal Ka'ai, and the Office of Public Engagement, where our communities work is led by Howard O. And we collectively advise the President on efforts like addressing anti-Asian bias and promoting inclusion and belonging for AAN and HPIs. My position was created last March, just before Heritage Month. It's hard to believe that we're already in the home stretch of another Heritage Month. Madeline, you're going to take a nap in a couple of weeks, I know. And we do all of this, you know, in a time of reflection, which we do every year and every month afterwards in between, to reflect on our achievements and our milestones, and also to recognize and name the persisting challenges that we continue to fight for. And it's all done with the support of a president and a vice president who have made clear their commitment to uplifting and empowering AAN and HPI individuals, families, and communities since their first days in office. Since the beginning of the administration, President Biden and Vice President Harris have prioritized addressing anti-Asian hate and advancing safety for our AAN and HPI communities. As we all know, incidents of anti-Asian hate continue to cause terror and anguish in our communities across the country. And these incidents strike members of our community in ordinary places, in public places, in places of work and worship, in schools, and in our neighborhoods. In 2021, there was a 339% increase in reports in hate crimes and incidents against AAN and HPIs. We also saw a rise in gender-based violence, with AAN and HPI women facing a disproportionate impact and burden by this hate. 62% of reported incidents were reported by AAN and HPI women. In his first days in office, the President announced that it is the official policy of this administration to condemn anti-Asian bias and violence. Last May, he signed the bipartisan COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act into law. And this past spring, you may recall that the President used his platform during the State of the Union address to reaffirm his commitment to our communities. To quote the President, "These acts are wrong, they are un-American, and they must stop." Our administration has also supported AAN and HPIs in other areas, whether it be providing immediate relief through the American Rescue Plan, supporting Asian American and Native American Pacific Islander serving institutions, and also acknowledging the injustices of the past, such as the proclamation that he issued on the Day of Remembrance that regretfully acknowledged the 120,000 Americans of Japanese descent who were stripped of their civil rights and incarcerated as a result of a presidential executive order 9066. So I say all of this not just to give you a snapshot of the work that we're doing in this administration, but to offer a context of what brings me to this work, why I do what I do. When I was appointed as one of the President's deputies last year, the President made it clear that we, AAN and HPIs, have a seat at the table. I knew this work wouldn't be easy, but much of my career hasn't been. I've spent my entire life working towards social justice, with questions of identity and representation, not only in a personal sense, but also professionally on behalf of other traditionally marginalized individuals and communities. This is why it's an honor of a lifetime to do this in the White House for the AAN and HPI communities. Now, to be honest, when I was younger, public service was an attractive career path because it was a reliable and stable union pathway to the middle class for many of us in Hawaii, where I grew up. And there we also have a tradition of AAN and HPI leaders in industry, in academia, in elected office, and in the military. So I grew up with a lot of examples that didn't make it impossible to imagine myself serving the public. Also, growing up in Hawaii, we have a saying, it's based on the Japanese saying, "Okage samade." It doesn't matter what ethnicity we are, it speaks to our values and what brings us to this work. But it's also a mode of being and doing for us. It loosely translates into, because of you, I am what I am. And it's closely tied to the concepts of giri and otagai, our obligation to those who came before us and for the people coming in the future. I saw this my whole life. I heard and witnessed this sense of obligation and courage to lead through stories of and from my ancestors. My grandfather served with the 100th Infantry Battalion, separate. From its formation in June 1942 until December 1942, when he was reassigned to the Military Intelligence Service. So he was one of the Senpai Gumi from the 100th Battalion. After graduating from the MIS language school at Camp Savage, Minnesota, he served in the Pacific Theater with the 27th Infantry Division in the Saipan and Okinawa campaigns. And so for some of those whose dads or grandpas or uncles served in the MIS, it will not surprise you that I only recently learned about what this meant, what duties he performed, what valor he served with, because he never spoke about it openly during his lifetime. Life-saving heroism and service were common to the men who served with the 100th and the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. My uncle Curly, my great-uncle Masato Nakai, served with the 100th Battalion in Europe and was awarded the Medal of Honor. His brother-in-law, Uncle Ronald, another 100th veteran, was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross in a separate action in Italy. Uncle Ronald's younger brother, Uncle Robert, served with the 442nd and was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously for his action in France. At the same time, my great-great-uncle, my great-grandpa's younger brother, was arrested and imprisoned on Sand Island in Hawaii and then transported to a New Mexico incarceration camp for being a leader of his fishing village in Kaneohe. He was released in November 1945 in poor health and died only shortly after returning home to Hawaii. So like so many, these men, or the boys, as my grandma used to call them, they rose to defend and serve the only nation they knew, despite being treated unfathomably by its own government, sent away to incarceration camps and shunned by the rest of the country. And I also have to mention my father, Kenneth Moritsugu, who earned 2 stars in uniformed services. He rose to become the first Asian American to serve twice in the position of acting U.S. Surgeon General. So you could say that public service came naturally to me, and that's part of my privilege. And it's one of the honors that I use my platform to be able to kind of grow a little bit outside of my comfort zone. While the motivation for it was certainly different from when I was just starting out in my career, my motivation for public service is crystal clear today. Fighting for social justice and equality, fighting hate, and empowering communities and individuals. It's hard work, but okage-sama de. I am what I am because of you. And throughout my career, I've been lucky to learn from extraordinary leaders and public servants who not only inspired me, but believed in me. They modeled the kind of leadership that I admire and try to emulate. Senator Harry Reid of Nevada, Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois, Secretary Julian Castro, Senator Danny Akaka from Hawaii, all of whom were unwavering in their principles, devoted to centering the community that they served and truly caring for their teams. We also have Undersecretary Gina Ortiz-Jones, again, younger than me, but a coach and a teacher. She'd be embarrassed if I stated this. She was somebody who, against all odds, signed up under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and is now serving as the highest-ranking woman of color and Filipina in civilian leadership at the Air Force. We have folks like General Taguba, who always gave me usually constructive criticism, offered words of wisdom, and encouraged me as I advanced my career. And we have, of course, our beloved Secretary Mineta, who we lost earlier this month, a veteran, a leader, an inspiration to us all. We would not be here or as good as we are without him. You see, because all of my bosses and my mentors, the General Tagubas, the Secretary Minetas, they're the ones who've taught me and mentored me about how to be better so I can keep fighting for justice and possibly change and improve people's lives. And it occurs to me that the General Tagubas of the world did not have General Tagubas supporting them. But now we have PPALM. And through my mentors and the service of my family members, I have learned the courage to lead. And as we keep charging ahead to advance equity and justice and opportunity for AAN and HPIs, know that we have a president and a vice president who really truly see us and hear us and value us. This is leadership that values diversity. And so with that, I would like to close with a few points on diversity. Did you know that the Biden-Harris administration is the most diverse administration in the history of the U.S. government? More and more people of all race, religion, ability status, sexual orientation, and gender have a seat at the table. The data speaks for itself. You see it in the news every day. From the very top with Vice President Harris, the first woman and person of South Asian descent to serve as Vice President, and Ambassador Catherine Tai, our cabinet member and the first woman of color and person of Taiwanese descent to serve as our U.S. trade representative. And while the AA and NHPI communities make up a little bit less than 7% of the U.S. population today, we represent 14% of all political appointees across the agencies. And we make up 17% of appointees in the White House. And we know why this matters. We were talking about this at lunch. It's not just about quotas. It's not because of sympathy. We know firsthand that a diversity of views and experiences produces a healthier workplace, and for government, better and more sustainable policies and outcomes. When we see others who look like us, we see what is possible. I want to thank you for your service to those of you who are in uniform or who've served, and a great big mahalo for the opportunity to share this space with you. See, he's still giving me orders.
I'm a taskmaster, remember? Stay here.
Okay.
Well, this is the reason why we invited her to be our inspirational guest speaker today, don't you think? And because she brings value to what we're doing today. All the stories she told about me, they're not true. Really not true. But again, inspirational to say the least. And at least we thank you for having a place and a seat at the President's table on AA and HPI matters. But we want to bestow upon you a small token of our appreciation. Is the venerated, coveted Eagle Award. Eagle soars, right? And she actually is emblematic of that. For your distinguished public service and for your leadership, we want to give you a small token of our sincere appreciation. Where's your sign? All right, here we go. Photo op. Okay, we're almost at a time hack. And before we show you another feature video, let me get my place here. Where are you? Where are you? Okay, before we show you our last feature story, I just want to acknowledge a few of other people that are here. Ms. Marie Blanco, former Chief of Staff to Senator Daniel Inouye, actually has been with us. She helped us pass the Congressional Gold Medal for the Filipino Veterans of Congressional Gold Medal, along with the Chinese American Congressional Gold Medal. She is now serving as the Vice Chairman of the Filipino Veterans Recognition and Education Project. And one of the folks that you saw in the video earlier, Mr. John Malagrito. Where are you, John? He's a consummate activist for human rights and social justice for a very long time, ever since he arrived on the shores of the United States and serving as the Executive Secretary. Colonel Chris Craig, where are you? You're seated in the back. He's a commander of the 364th Civil Affairs Brigade, I think at Fort Carson. Is that right? Okay, so he left the mountains of Colorado to come and dine with us at sea level. Now we want to end our program with a special recognition featuring NHPI individuals, units, or organizations who serve and sacrifice while serving in our country. This year we feature Fireman, 2nd Class Telesforo de la Cruz, Trinidad, and I'm sure Chief Petty Officer, Senior Chief Petty Officer Ray Cabacar will be honored by this. A United States Navy, a Filipino American, and recipient of the Medal of Honor for his conspicuous gallantry and courage in April of 1915, 107 years ago. His story is included in your program describing his act of heroism 107 years ago. It took a small group of retirees, veterans, and community advocates who started a call to action to elevate Fireman 2nd Class Telesforo Trinidad into our national view. and have a naval warship named after him. On May 19th, 2022, last week, Secretary of the Navy Carlos Del Toro announced a future Arleigh Burke guided missile destroyer, DDG-139, to be named as the USS Telesforo de la Cruz Trinidad after him. Isn't that great? So we're actually elevating ourselves. He is the only Filipino enlisted sailor in the United States Navy to be awarded the Medal of Honor. No one else has followed him for all those years. This is truly a historic time in our country and during the AANHPI Heritage Month that has a forgotten American hero that we can bring to life in 2022. A naval warship will carry his legacy for a time. So please show our short video to commemorate him.
This whole thing came at a...
Sure, we've heard of the amazing things our grandfathers did when they were younger. But there's nothing quite like what Rene Trinidad's Lolo achieved while serving the U.S. Navy more than a century ago.
The Medal of Honor has recognized the outstanding service and contributions of distinguished members of the U.S. military. 33.
His Lolo, Fireman Second Class Telesforo Trinidad, was honored as a hero after saving the lives of 2 U.S. Navy crew members when fire broke out on their ship after boiler room explosions on board the USS San Diego on January 21, 1915. Trinidad remains the first and the only Asian American to receive the U.S. Navy Medal of Honor, the highest possible recognition in the U.S. Naval Force for heroism. Today, there is a movement to name a U.S. Navy warship after the Filipino-American hero, called the USS Telesforo Trinidad Campaign.
I'm doing this for my father. My dad passed away December 23rd of last year. This to me is my tribute to my dad because I know it meant a lot to my dad and actually to his siblings as well.
The campaign aims to convince the U.S. Navy Secretary to name the next Navy warship in Telesforo's honor.
It will take a total grassroots support because when the grassroots support becomes imminent, that will definitely force the SECNAP to make a decision.
The Philippine Consul General of New York is among those lending their support to this campaign.
So this is little known part of our history. Well, so we need to get that out.
What are the possible ships that can be named after Telesforo Trinidad?
They could name a carrier. We want his name on a war-fighting ship. He was a war fighter. He was a hero. You know, his actions were on a warship, a cruiser.
But the hero's grandson has an even bigger dream for the U.S. Navy warship to be named USS Telesforo Trinidad.
And my wish is that the ship that they send to the West Philippine Sea is Telesforo Trinidad, a destroyer or something to get the Chinese out of there.
PhilAm community leaders are urged to support the campaign by sending letters to their respective elected officials. Don Tagala, ABS-CBN News.
One interesting note about Fireman Second Class Trinidad, that he was given a stipend after being awarded the Medal of Honor of $100 at that time. Could you imagine $100 meant $1 million for him? Granted that then we forgot all about him, so I think it's very appropriate. So our time is almost up. We want to spend a couple more minutes, and I want to invite Madeline back to the podium.
I hope you've had an enjoyable lunch. I hope you've been inspired by the people that you've heard from today. On behalf of APAICS, I want to thank General Taguba and the leadership of PPALM for your continued partnership. I also want to acknowledge the APAICS team for all their hard work and dedication to the APAICS mission. And I'd like to also recognize the tremendous work of the APAICS board members who are here today. Special thanks to the tag team of Ivory Zorich and Lita Peterson for their untiring efforts to make this event possible. Let's all give them a round of applause.
Okay, we talked about APAICS and PPALM, but who are the board members that have attended today? Stand up. Be recognized. Come on, come on. these people, you know, we don't want to get stigmatized again that we're too shy, okay? We're part of American history now, so be bold and be vocal. So I don't always. All right. So we want to thank everyone for coming. As a favor, let's all pray for the children and the teachers that were gunned down in Uvalde, Texas, and also for those families who lost their lives, whose relatives were lost in Buffalo. Somehow it's got to stop. So please put them in your prayers and your thoughts. So thanks everyone who's helped with today's program, without whom this event would have not been possible. For those of you who are still carrying your cell phones, your cameras, or whatever you're carrying in your pocket, we will have a photo op near the stage. Take a lot of pictures of Madeline, because you know she needs a lot of recognition, and not that she, but she deserves it anyway for setting up the APAICS this event. Yeah, so please stay safe, driving home or driving anywhere or traveling, and stay away from COVID. And we hope to see you again next year at about the same time frame. So again, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.